Dr. Jeff Arnett, Superintendent of Eanes ISD. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the Learning Lab. Matt Greer, you are the ISD Police Chief at Eanes ISD.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome again to the Learning Lab. Today we want to talk to you about starting an ISD police department. We get calls all the time at the Safety Center. What does it take? We're interested. We're not sure what to do. So we want to spend about an hour talking about that with you guys. Before we start, Dr. Arnett, will you just tell us about you, who you are, your history, a little bit about Eanes ISD?
Sure. I am in my 37th year in education and have been in a variety of states. Started in Missouri in the St. Louis area, spent several years in New York, then to Chicago, and have been here in Austin and in Texas for the last 8 years. So that's my journey.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been all over the place. Tell us a bit about Eanes ISD and the community that it's in.
Well, Eanes ISD is, by some rankings, regarded as the top public school district in the United States, and we're very proud of that. It's an extremely high standard. The expectations are significant, so we have to work really hard every day to live up to those. But we don't take that for granted. We're always looking for ways to be better and to be the best that we possibly can be for the community and the families and our staff. So we're really proud of our school district. We're not perfect by any means, but I think the efforts that we've made to try to improve safety and security, especially in the last year, have been extremely well received by the community.
Great. It's a journey, right? I think there's no perfect safety place for a district, right?
No.
It's always about the journey to get there.
Yeah, and so much of what we do with safety and security really is dependent on what our local community expects, and that's the same for any other school district.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Chief Greer, tell us a bit about you and your time as the police chief.
Yeah, well, I started with Austin PD in 1997. I was there for 23 years and worked patrol and as a detective and made lieutenant and retired as a director of the Austin Regional Intelligence Center in 2019. And I retired to take this position as Safety and Risk Management Director at Eanes ISD. So totally different career, but really interesting, and it was a lot of fun, and it's been a great 5 years. And then transitioned to the role of police chief just last year. Not something I expected to do. But, circumstances sort of brought us to where we are today, and I couldn't be prouder of the team that we've put together at Eanes ISD. It's really amazing, and the success that we've had this year has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Can either of you talk about the motivating factors that prompted you to begin and start up, research the potential of a ISD police department?
I'll go first. I'll say, if I had to summarize it, I would say cost effectiveness. Because at the time it was, post Uvalde, we started talking about increasing law enforcement in the district. And so, we were looking for ways to do that. And we looked at all different options. We looked at, marshals or guardians and increasing our contract with Travis County, which is the agency that provided our school resource officers previously. And then, of course, we were also looking at what would it take to create our own department. And I think just a variety of factors contributed to that, but, one of which was the control over our officers and being able to sort of decide what the duties of those officers would be and what their roles would be on the campus. And so that was a factor, and the community response after Uvalde. I think there was much more demand for increased presence of law enforcement. And then, of course, while we were doing our research and our cost analysis, House Bill 3 was in the works. So we were very fortunate that we were sort of already teed up to make this move when House Bill 3 passed, and I'll let Dr. Arnett expand on that.
Yeah. I still recall conversations that Matt and I had probably 2 years ago, and at that time we never imagined that we would need our own police department. We felt like the arrangement that we had was sufficient, but unfortunately with sort of this ongoing sequence and series of tragedies across the country, and then, as Chief Greer said, the legislation that was pending in the state, it just became increasingly clear to us that we needed to do something different in our community. We have a very engaged community, and so we were hearing from them every day about what we needed to do or what their expectation was in terms of keeping students safe. So all of those factors converged about a year ago, I think, and really prompted us and our Board of Trustees to understand that we had to do something different. And fortunately, our size, I think, is really conducive to moving quickly. And over a period of a few months, really it surprises us now as we reflect on it just how rapidly it all came together. But it really was a collaborative process with our community, with our Board of Trustees, understanding that there was a much greater expectation for safety and security. And we put together a department that we're very proud of.
I've heard you say community a few times already, and I love hearing that. And it sounds like you're very community driven. So let's deep dive that a little bit more. Who were the specific stakeholders at the table that were a part of this conversation to determine if an ISD PD was the right move for you guys?
Well, I think it did start internally, and from an administrative standpoint, really with Chief Greer's leadership and some other individuals who had some experience in this arena, we understood that we needed to at least advance the conversation. And so with Chief Greer's help, a lot of research was done behind the scenes, and that evolved over a period of a few months, and then we finally brought it to our Board of Trustees for a conversation with them. But then the next natural step was to bring our community into that dialogue too. And so that all transpired over a period of a few months, and it really was a lot of people at the table, a lot of people contributing to that discussion.
Okay. Did you have any pushback in the community? We've talked to other districts that have explored this, and there was someone in the community that wasn't a fan of the idea. Did you have any of that in the community, and how did you address it?
Yeah, I think we had a little bit. I think overwhelmingly we had support for this idea. But the key was to provide as much information as we could about what exactly this would look like, what the duties of the officers would be, what they would look like physically, how the campus might be impacted. So I think any pushback that we had, we were able to help those community members become a little bit more comfortable. And we just built trust. And we had a lot of meetings with parents. We had town hall meetings. We had lots of conversations with the board about exactly how this would look. Because I think for some people it's hard to envision exactly what's going to happen with an officer on campus. And I think you have some fear about, well, are you going to be, running around arresting kids? And but I think, once we had these conversations, we sort of started to overcome that. And of course, now that we've been doing it for a while, I think most of those fears are completely alleviated. So,
yeah,
you mentioned the fears, and obviously, what the general public sees is the traditional side of law enforcement. They seldomly see school-based law enforcement, which is completely different. Can you talk about the cultural change that you all experienced and share with the listeners exactly how that transformed?
Yeah, and this was a change for us too, because I come from Austin PD, as do most of the officers in our department. Right. We have 11 total sworn. 10 of us are retired from Austin PD. So this role in school-based law enforcement is new to us as well. So we didn't really know what to expect either, and we had lots of conversations with principals. And you talked about stakeholders. Principals are key stakeholders, and campus administrators, and helping them understand that we're going to work together and be collaborative. So we had a lot of conversations with them about exactly what our roles would be, and that we're here to help support the campus. I want to read one thing that I think is important here, because a couple of weeks ago we got an email, or one of our officers got an email from a staff member. And the staff member said, I loved watching the video. And she was referring to a video that we created to talk about the new police department and what we were going to now look like in uniform and cars. And it says, though I'll admit I was super skeptical at first about having a police officer in the building, I'm not a big fan of guns in general. Your presence has opened my mind. I love having you here, not just for our safety, but also so that kids in the community, myself included, are reminded that most police officers are friendly, open-minded, and overall awesome. Thanks for helping me expand my views. And I think that's what it takes. It takes that relationship building between the officers, parents, staff members, administration, and kids.
Yeah. I think the tipping point for us, before we got to the point where the department was approved by our board, was helping everyone understand that we were not out to hire conventional police officers. We were really looking for individuals that could be so much more on a campus and in the community, and not just contribute to the physical safety and security, but also the mental health needs of our students and our staff. And so when the community, parents, and our board understood that that was our commitment, that we were looking for exceptional individuals to be much more than just armed security guards, then everybody understood that, yes, this could be something that is really unique, and that certainly is what we've created.
Yeah, there's, we can look even to the national spotlight and see where, traditional policing has entered the schoolhouse, and that relationship was not created, or it was quickly broken because of over-policing, right? Arresting kids, going to juvie, just over-ticketing kids, right? There's a time and place when there's a breach of the peace that may require law enforcement, but not using it every single time if it's not necessary.
Yeah, the informal presence is by far school-based law enforcement's number one objective.
Yeah.
There's no question, and you guys are fortunate, myself coming from Austin PD, and I know that at one time we were touted, the number one best law enforcement agency in the country, and having the training that we received in Austin was by far. I get to travel the state, and I see what everybody else does, and we were very, very well trained. And having, 10 of the 11 at Eanes coming from Austin PD is and then to transition in, because you had to select, you have to be very selective as who you're going to get, because you don't want guys coming on your campuses and being a traditional police officer, chasing drugs or putting people in jail. That's not the objective in a school setting.
Yeah. And I should say our 11th officer is equally amazing. She doesn't come from Austin PD, but she's outstanding.
Let's get a little more technical. So let's dive into the process. So I know of starting the application process, going in front of the board. No, I don't want to get too technical and bore our listeners, but I think it's important for our listeners who might be folks that are interested in starting an ISD PD to hear just what that process is of what's the application, getting the resolution from the board, how is TCOL involved, how is DPS involved?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. And if anybody's coming to the conference, I'll be doing a presentation a little bit more in detail about the process. But
and real quick, you're talking about the Texas School Safety Center Conference in San Antonio.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
So I would say there were several months of memos and conversations with our board that included cost analysis and different options. If we were to create a police department, with X amount of officers, how much would that cost, and this amount of officers, and sort of comparing that and contrasting it to what we had with our contract with Travis County, and how could we fund that. So that took a couple of months. And then last June was when, it was about a year ago, that the board voted to create a police department and an officer on every campus. And so once that happened, that was kind of, go time to start creating all of the necessary documents that TCOL needed to start an agency. Pretty involved, but others have done it before us, so we're very fortunate. We were able to lean on other agencies that had done this before. And so, and TCOL was very helpful throughout the process. We had a representative that helped us with all of our documentation. It starts with a resolution from the board, and then, policies that are required for your TCOL license. And we had to have an MOU for dispatch. That was a little bit of a challenge, I must say, of all the things that we needed. Because dispatch centers are just like police departments. They're low on resources. So Travis County wasn't able to do that for us because of a lack of resources. So we went to an agency close by and were able to get them to dispatch for us. So that was sort of an unanticipated challenge, I'll say. But we got through it pretty quickly. In addition to other agencies around us, the Texas Police Chiefs Association has quite a few policies available online. Of course, they need to be tweaked for your own agency, but it's a good place to start. And now with the Texas ISD Police Chiefs Association, I think that's pretty helpful. At least we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, so I would say. From the time that the board voted on the resolution to the time that we were approved by TCOL was probably about 4 or 5 months.
Not a lot of time, really, right?
Not too
that
bad.
Moves quick, so
Not
you
too
have
bad.
to be ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think all that time, if I recall, we knew that we were moving towards likely adoption and the implementation of a department. So Chief Greer and his colleagues were out there trying to determine who are the officers that we might be able to recruit to join our department. So that was happening simultaneously, if I remember.
Yeah. And, one thing that we did, which might be a little bit unusual, is that we hired all of our people as civilians to start while we were creating our police department. So they came to us last July or August, most of them. And started as civilians, I guess you could say marshals or guardians.
Correct.
On our campuses. And so the campus had an opportunity to work with them, and we had a chance to build relationships before our department was approved, and then we all put on uniforms and started coming as police officers.
So from the time you got the approval from the board to the time you were fully functional and fully staffed was how many months or years?
9 months.
Okay.
Wow.
Wow, that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about uniforms, vehicles, the branding. But before we do that, I don't want to miss the whole funding discussion. So I don't want to jump into being active before we talk about the funding to get there. What did that look like for Eanes to build up, that critical mass so that you had majority support to get that passed?
Well, there were a lot of synergies that occurred during this time, and one of those was we were also approaching our community and voters with a bond proposition. Okay. And so that was a fairly significant referendum, and as a part of that, knowing that we were moving in this direction potentially, we did include a line item that would help us address some of the vehicles and some of the equipment needs of a department. So we had the flexibility built into the bond so that once the bond was approved, and then it wasn't too long after that the police department was approved by our board, that we knew that we at least had the resources available to us to provide the physical assets and the equipment that the department would need. So that helped us in that regard, and I think other school districts or ISDs could certainly consider what they might be able to do out of their INS or their bond funds. But on the M&O side, just the costs of the officers themselves, we wanted to make sure that we had enough available to recruit highly trained, experienced, well-qualified individuals. And so that was I think probably the greater conversation that we needed to have, because the state really does not provide much funding to help offset those costs, even though it is a mandate now. And so we had to work through our board, we had to work through the budget process, which was also occurring at the same time, to make sure that we had sufficient funds to afford the caliber of officers that we were looking for. So in all total, we had to look at a combination of funds. I will say to Chief Greer's credit, he's been able to secure some significant grant funding too to offset some of those costs. So a lot of different monies had to come together to make it possible to make it affordable for us.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I want to talk about your vehicles. I have a Tesla, and I heard you guys have Teslas, and I think that's the coolest thing ever. How did that come to be? Like, who introduced the idea of a Tesla as your vehicles for the district?
Well, as soon as the board said go, we knew just from talking to other agencies that vehicles were going to be a challenge. So we were calling dealerships all over the state and really all over the country looking for police vehicles, traditional Tahoes, Explorers, whatever we could find. And we were just hitting a brick wall. And they just weren't available. And we have some great car dealership owners in our district, and we even talked to them, and they couldn't get the vehicles. And I understand why. The companies are building, higher end vehicles. They're behind on production, and so they're filling those orders first. I get that. But it was just really a matter of, what else could we think outside the box? And so our administrative assistant, who has been extremely helpful throughout this process, one day came in and she goes, "Have you ever heard of Tesla police cars?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." But she said, "Well, other agencies around the country are doing this, and maybe we should look into it." I said, "Yeah, great. Let's set up a meeting and let's hear what they have to say." So we met with them, and they said, "Well, we'll get them to you in 60 days, and we'll give them to you at this cost," which was significantly less than anything else we had been quoted. And so that was really it. We said, let's do it. Let's try it. For what we do, it works. Yeah. It's probably not for everybody. I can understand if you're, Austin PD and you're trying to have a patrol vehicle on the road 24/7, that's going to be very difficult. Right. But for what we use those vehicles for, they're effective. They were cost effective for us. And on about the 60th day, they showed up at my office on a big trailer. And they offloaded them and said, "Here you go." Yeah. So that's kind of how that went.
And that cost savings too, right? I know maintenance is lower. Yeah. What you're paying in electricity is significantly lower than what gas is.
Right. Yeah. And I mentioned the bond. One of the other interesting things was we had a large amount in our referendum devoted to the installation of solar on all of our campuses. So now we're generating our own electricity for our campuses, and it's that electricity that is also being used to charge the vehicles. So there was a significant cost savings, and when we did the math and we looked at the economics, it made perfect sense. Yeah. When you talk about resistance, that's probably the one aspect of the department that we might have encountered the most pushback on, really? Because there are a variety of opinions, some of which, have some political leanings to them about reusable energy and electric vehicles. And so we had to spend quite a bit of time working with our community again to help them understand the benefits of this. And at one point, we had to slightly delay the decision on the vehicles because of just a lot of questions in the community. But that also provided the opportunity for us to step back and to kind of revisit and recommunicate why we felt like there were greater benefits to these vehicles. And now in the end, like every other aspect of our department, the community says, this is great.
Yeah, and you guys are just that much tighter for it, right? Yeah. Like leaning into the hesitancy or the fear of the opposition, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a key move.
One of the calls that we constantly get at the center are the challenges that some departments have in following through, and you touched on a little bit ago, administrative duties versus breach of the peace. Can you talk about that as to, obviously it comes from the superintendent to the principals, which is very, very helpful because there's many times the principals are making decisions that superintendent sometimes doesn't know about. But talk about administrative versus breach of the peace and how you guys have been able to work through that.
Yeah, I would say of all the challenges that we have, that's probably the most complicated and the most controversial. I know I'm on the Texas Law Enforcement Facebook site, so I see the school-based law enforcement site, and I see the discussions about, what are you guys doing? We're doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. You should. So there's a lot of sort of controversy about what is considered an administrative duty and what isn't. I think there's a little bit of gray there, probably a lot of gray there. Our philosophy is we are there to support the campus and to keep kids safe. That doesn't always mean that what we're doing is related to a criminal offense. Our officers are mentors, they're building relationships, they're helping the campus get through situations and solve problems that sometimes don't have any criminal nexus. I think where the problem comes in is when you have officers who perceive that they're being told to do something or given orders to do something that they feel should be handled at an administrative level. And so, again, I always say relationships, and I've probably used that word several times today, but the key is building the relationships on the front end so that when you do have some sort of disagreement, you can just come to the table and talk about it. I think where it tends to fall apart is when you haven't built those relationships on the front end. So, and I think a lot of that, reading the law, I think a lot of it comes from the idea that in the past officers were, like you said, over-policing and arresting students for something that could be handled, from school-based discipline. And so we have had a few situations where, could we have filed a criminal charge? Maybe. But the best approach was probably an administrative approach, and the campus handles it. So we, Dr. Arnett and I have a great relationship. We talk about these things. The principals and I have a relationship. And I think it's helped that I've been there for the last 5 years working with them on safety issues so that now if we have any sort of disagreement about something, we just get together and talk about it.
And Dr. Arnett, what is your directive cascaded down to the principal level as it relates to discipline and school-based law enforcement?
Well, we've made it very clear in our policy and in our guidelines that officers are not to be involved in student discipline, but they are there to support our campuses and to provide for the safety and security. And sometimes those questions can blur a little bit, and I think that's why that working relationship and that collaboration is so important, so that when you encounter a situation that is complex or there are a lot of questions or it may be gray, everybody can get together and figure out, okay, what is the responsibility of our officer in this case or the department? What is the campus's responsibility? What can we address as a student discipline matter, and what may actually be a legal matter or even potentially a criminal offense? So it's that continual conversation. Every campus is different. Every principal is different. And by nature, they each have their own unique culture and personality and approach. But we have to have a cohesive culture and cohesive approach to keeping students safe. And so that expectation is something that we talk about all the time. And again, I think our size lends itself to that dialogue. We're able to interact with each other. We can have these conversations in a group setting as well as individually, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Does Eanes still have a convocation? And if so, do you make a presentation at the convocation that relates to school safety?
Not at the convocation. We still do have a convocation, but we train all of our staff members every year before school starts.
Great.
We get at least an hour with every staff member in the district.
Great.
But I think, talking about administrative duties, I think that can be confused sometimes. I tell my officers, you shouldn't be assigned to the cafeteria as a lunch monitor, but you probably want to be in the cafeteria every day because that's where you build your relationships with students. You probably shouldn't be assigned as a car rider line monitor, but you probably want to be in the car rider line because that's where you're seeing everybody come in. So I think you just really have to find the
Yeah,
balance.
that has been a rule of thumb throughout the state, as what you just alluded to is, it'd be a good idea, but not mandatory.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, we do have another law in Texas that requires the police chief to report to the superintendent. It already sounds like you guys have a very organic relationship. You talk about that multidisciplinary, inclusive relationship. Tell us more about how you two report to each other, that information that you share, and why it's so important that the chief of police reports to the superintendent.
Well, I think on the org chart, it may indicate that the chief reports to the superintendent, but I would look at it as more of an alliance. It's really a partnership.
Yeah.
And previously, in Matt's former position with the district overseeing safety and security, before he became chief, he did report to someone else. However, when we made this transition, there was no question. This was going to be a partnership, and the chief and the superintendent would work alongside each other. So we knew that coming into this, and we made that transition seamlessly. And I think that was really a result of having worked together for a period of years, and especially the months leading up to the creation of the police department. We had to be in lockstep because if we were going to present this to the board and if we were going to convince our community that there was a necessity for this, then we always had to be on the same page. And we always had to have an open, ongoing conversation about what we needed to do and how we could approach this. And I think even today, we meet regularly. We probably text almost every day about situations and matters, or call each other and speak about something that's going on our campuses. So there is a very symbiotic relationship, I think, in terms of how we work together.
Great.
Chief Greer, TCOL has mandated training for school-based law enforcement. Do you want to? Can you share with our listeners the 4064 requirements and the alert requirements and the 180 days and things that are affiliated with? Once you've created your department, now you've got to institute these training guidelines.
Yeah, so 4064 school-based law enforcement, sort of introductory class required for anybody working in a school within 180 days of being commissioned. So our officers have all been through that already. I think our newest 2 officers just finished it last week. And it's a really important class because, again, for those of us coming from traditional law enforcement, this stuff is new. We're not familiar with Texas Education Code, and that you really need to know those things. So you guys have luckily offered enough training that our officers have been able to get through it. I personally prefer in-person training. I think most folks do, but the virtual option is there, and so some of our officers have used that.
Alert.
Yeah. So alert is the requirement in this TCOL cycle to participate in an active shooter exercise training. And TCOL's got a list of training that qualifies for that. So for us, we're putting together an active active attack integrated response program, and we'll have that in June. But that involves multiple agencies, and a school is a great training facility for that. And so we'll have EMS and fire and local law enforcement partners there. But I think for school districts, if you can do that and you have the people that are trained to be instructors in alert or active shooter training, I think it's best to do it at your campus, at one of your campuses.
Now that you guys are up and functional, what's that palpable feel of safety now? Are people feeling more safe? Is there a different angle to that safety that they're feeling? Could you talk about how people are talking to you about how they feel now that there's an ISD police department?
I mean, we have gotten overwhelming support for the department, and we've heard repeatedly that folks are feeling very comfortable. And in fact, just the other day, my partner, BK, was at his campus and was approached by a mom who said, that she wanted to just let him know that she asked her daughter what the best part of the school year was. And this wasn't a student that he knew. He didn't recognize her or her name, and which is unusual because he knows everybody's name just about, and they know him. But she said her favorite part of the school year was having BK on campus, and that she felt safe and comfortable going to school. So I say, job well done to BK. That's what we want.
Yeah, that's the expectation
Yep.
of your officers when they report to a campus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another indication of how well received and embraced our officers are is a bit of a challenge that we have now. Our officers will periodically need to be off campus for training, or they may have their own personal reasons that allow them to take a day off. And being able to provide coverage when they're not there, because now parents and staff and students notice when the officer is not present, and they miss that person. And so now we have to figure out, okay, what do we need to do in terms of staffing to make sure that we are appropriately covered, because the expectation now is that someone is always there, always watching out, always protecting the campus. And so that's something that we're probably going to have to address in the next year is, can we possibly find a little bit more space and money in the budget to provide some coverage for our officers, maybe a floating officer, to ensure that every campus has that coverage and protection at all times.
Great. Dr. Arnett, I'd like to ask you first and then follow up with Chief Greer on this question. And now that you are fully functional and you've created your ISD Police Department, would you do anything different?
I mean, honestly, where we're at today, we are so gratified and I think so overwhelmingly pleased by the reception that the officers in the department have received. I don't know that we would do anything different. We certainly learned a lot in the process, and for it to have happened as quickly as it did and to have what we think is just a stellar team of officers in place, that's really a testament to Chief Greer and their relationships. They were able to find these individuals that perfectly fit the job description and the policies created by our Board of Trustees. So that is really pleasing to us. I think as we will look forward, we're learning things about the department and things that we know that we need to do or would like to do a little bit differently in the future just to continue to be better. As I said, that's always our goal. How do we take this to the next level? How do we continue to improve?
Chief Greer, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Dr. Arnett summed it up pretty well. I thought about this question myself, and I don't know that I would really do anything different. I might start my own uniform shop, to be honest with you, because uniforms are tough to get. But other than that, I'm so happy with our department and the way our officers have just integrated with the campuses. I can't think of anything that could be better at this moment in time. So I have to say I don't know that I would, other than some little minor tweaks and maybe equipment here and there. But
And you asked about branding earlier. A lot of thought went into how our officers are attired, and even down to what the patches and the badges look like. We didn't want this to be typical. We really wanted to be unique. And while there are some traditional elements of their uniform and their equipment, I think they look different and they look more welcoming. And that, again, I think is evidence of how we tried to approach this department differently and how I think Chief Greer has created a model department for other districts wanting to do the same thing.
Well, that's a perfect segue for my next question. What's that nugget of wisdom that you want to impart to a school board member, a parent, a superintendent that's listening to this podcast and they're tinkering with the idea, maybe this is for us? What would you tell them?
I would say just build relationships and give as much information as you can, and build that trust on the front end, because I think people are, their fear comes from the unknown and not knowing what this might look like, not knowing what the officers would be doing. So I think building trust and relationships early is really the key to success.
And I would echo that. I would say, as a superintendent working with the Board of Trustees, don't be afraid of this. As Chief Greer said there's some fear, and I think there's some uncertainty and some questions around it. But if you approach it in the right way, if you have the framework of your policies in place, and you look at models that are out there, which we certainly did, and we tried to incorporate not just best practice, but next practice, and making sure that we had all of that right. But then the most important thing were the officers who were recruited, and we wanted to make sure that we found individuals who fit that profile that our Board of Trustees was looking for. And we felt like the cohesiveness of one department rather than kind of a piecemeal approach, whether it be marshals and guardians or working with local law enforcement. We wanted that continuity and that cohesive approach to having our own department and having the right people in the department and having all of the policies and the framework in place behind them. The combination really made it right for us. And in the end, we look back on it and we ask ourselves, what were we even afraid of?
Well, as we close, I want to take the time to thank both of y'all for being here. It's just important for those that are listeners that are interested in potentially starting their ISD police department to hear your perspective and your experience, and maybe call you at some point to ask you questions, which we'll share your numbers or your emails, because I know I've called on you before and you've helped me out immensely with folks that were thinking of creating their department. So I thank both of y'all for being here.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all.